Here is Dr. Anthony Fauci. He is being questioned by Jim Clyburn on the House Select Subcommittee on Coronavirus Crisis. On the coronavirus crisis. Are we even is Fauci even in touch with the White House anymore? This is such a bizarre situation we're in. And again, I think the real question is going to be, what is the next move by the Trump administration? Here is Anthony Fauci explaining why the United States response has been such a disaster. Now, look, there was always going to be you have a pandemic, there's always going to be problems. And even in Europe and different places, they're having to re-shut down, they're having a resurgence. There's a certain inevitability to this, but nowhere is it as bad as it is in the United States.
Can you help us understand why? While Europe has largely contained the virus, the United States has seen a continued rise in new cases.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The answer to that question is really somewhat complex, but I'll try maybe to very briefly go through what I believe are at least some of the factors that were involved. If you look at what happened in Europe when they shut down or locked down or went to shelter in place, however you want to describe it, they really did it to the tune of about 95+% of the country did that. When you actually look at what we did, even though we shut down, even though it created a great deal of difficulty, we really functionally shut down only about 50% in the sense of the totality of the country, which means when we reached our peak, as they did, they came down almost to a low baseline, as you've shown very clearly. But take a look at what happened to our baseline. We came up, down, and then we plateaued at about 20,000 cases a day. So we started off with a very difficult baseline of transmission that was going on at the time that we tried to open up the country. And when we opened up the country, what we saw, particularly most recently in the southern states, was an increase of cases to 20, 30, 40, 50, and a couple of weeks ago it was up to 70,000 per day, and now it's down between 50 and 60. And the reasons for that are complex. There were some states that...
Now, I just want to note one thing here. I've seen a breakdown of that last figure that he gave, that it went up to 70,000, it's down to 50, 60,000. It may very well be a coincidence. That dip back down to 50, 60,000, where it stabilized, happened almost exactly at the time that data no longer went directly to the CDC and went to the White House and DHHS. It also leveled off in red states. Blue states that were having outbreaks kept having a trajectory that was going up. Maybe that's a coincidence. Who knows? I just wanted to point that out. Continue.
Did very well, and there are some states that did not. And when I say did not, I mean, we put out, as Ranking Member Scalise mentioned, the guidelines of a gateway, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Some were followed very carefully and some were not.
Yeah. Scalise wearing his mask. Wasn't it? It was Scalise who said, I don't know what made me think of this when I see Scalise in that mask, but didn't he say, I'm like David Duke without the baggage, right?
Yeah, he's very sorry for saying that out loud in front of reporters.
I need to say that out loud. I mean, there you have it. I mean, Fauci's basically saying, we just didn't, I mean, look, there is no doubt that tens of thousands of people were going to die in the midst of a pandemic in this country. But the idea that we are now at 150,000 and we are not capable of testing in a timely manner, we have no capacity to trace in any way. We have no ability around the country to have any sense of security in opening schools. The idea that it is raging uncontrollably in certain areas of the country is a function of having a political party that was hell-bent on pretending it didn't exist, and that any plans to have a national response were quashed because there was a sense that this was only going to hit blue states. I mean, that's it. This is, and I will say the other thing that just sort of like broadly speaking, that would have made this a lot easier to respond. Although we could have had, let me put it this way. In a sane, rational country, had we had some type of social infrastructure that made it less onerous to have people stay at home and not work, to provide health care for people, and answer the question of like, how are you going to pay for that test? If we had had a pre-existing infrastructure in this country, a social infrastructure that supported people, things would have been a little bit easier. But even if we did, and we had this administration who was denying the reality of a pandemic, we would still be more or less just as effed. The next wave of immiseration that we're going to have is going to speak more to the fact that we have a country that doesn't have a system to support its people, essentially.
Yeah, and we also don't have networks of grassroots power or mutual aid in the way that a lot of other places do, right? Like Hong Kong, their local government was not great at the virus response at first. And then they quickly changed their tune due to a massive upswell of resistance from people utilizing connections that they made in the uprisings. So there are multiple reasons and there are multiple routes to this. But I would hope, I know that American protesters and leftists are focused on this issue. I just wish that we had more power right now.
Yeah. I mean,